Good morning, friends. I am Captain Dr. D.K. Ramawat, working as a non-invasive cardiologist at Ramawat Heart and General Medicine Hospital at Badmer, Rajasthan, India. Today, we are going to take second part of non-STEMI and unstable angina. Last time we have taken part 1 of non-STEMI and unstable angina. Last time we were running on antiplatelet therapy of the acute coronary syndrome, non-ST elevation MI, and we have discussed in that aspirin, P2Y12 inhibitor, PAR1 inhibitor, in aspirin, then thienopyridine adenosine diphosphate inhibitor, P2Y12 receptor inhibitor, which contains clopidogrel, ticagrelor, prasugrel and cangrelor, and also we have discussed Vorapaxar, brand name John TVT. And now we are continuing that antiplatelet, and that is the fourth antiplatelet here is glycoprotein second B third A inhibitor. So in the management of non-ST elevation acute coronary syndrome in Indian patients, we are running to antiplatelet, and in antiplatelet we have to discuss today in part 2 of non-ST elevation MI, glycoprotein second B third A inhibitor. They prevent the binding of fibrinogen, a clotting factor, thereby blocking platelet aggregation. They, in combination with aspirin, are considered standard antiplatelet therapy for patients at high risk for unstable angina. They include efzimumab, eptifibatide, tirofiban and lamivudine. First we are taking efzimumab, the brand name ReaPro, an irreversible glycoprotein second B third inhibitor. Remember, this is irreversible, and rest of other two, eptifibatide and tirofiban, are reversible. This is irreversible. It binds to receptor with high affinity and reduce platelet aggregation by 80%. Inhibition of platelet aggregation persists for up to 48 hours after the end of infusion. It is approved for use in elective urgent emergent PCI, percutaneous coronary intervention like angiography. Dosage in unstable angina indicated for prevention of cardiac complications in patients with unstable angina with PCI planned within 24 hours. The dose is 0.25 mg per kg IV bolus over at least 1 minute. Then you have to continue 0.125 microgram per kg per minute IV continuous infusion for 18 to 24 hours, concluding 1 hour post PCI, not to exceed 10 microgram per minute. Now dosage in adjunct to PCI. First dose was for unstable angina, now it is adjunct to PCI. Prevention of cardiac ischemic complications in patients undergoing PCI, 0.25 mg per kg IV bolus over at least 1 minute, then 10 to 60 minutes before start of PCI. So this 0.25 mg per kg IV bolus over at least 1 minute, 10 to 60 minutes before start of PCI. Then 0.125 microgram per kg per minute IV continuous infusion for 12 hours, not to exceed infusion rate of 10 microgram per minute. Stop continuous infusion of efzimumab in patient with failed PCI. The second, after efzimumab, eptifibatide, the brand name integrelin. It is a reversible glycoprotein second B third A inhibitor. It is a protein found in the venom of southeastern pygmy rattlesnake. Remember, found in venom of southeastern pygmy rattlesnake out of which aptifebatide is made. It reversibly prevents platelet adhesion by binding and inhibiting the glycoprotein B third A receptors of platelets. Effect persists for over the duration of maintenance infusion and are reversed when infusion ends. It is used where? Number 1, in patients with high risk features to lower the number of heart attacks in patients who have unstable angina or non-ST MI in whom invasive treatment is not planned. Second use, used in patients undergoing PCI including intracoronary stenting. Number 3rd use, used to enhance myocardial perfusion in STEMI before PCI. 4th indication, used to enhance incidence and speed of reperfusion when used in large doses in combination with heparin, aspirin, tissue plasmin activator in STEMI patients. Now, and 5th indication, used in combination of tissue plasminogen activator in acute ischemic strokes to prevent progression to subacute intracerebral hemorrhage. Doses in acute coronary syndrome, 180 microgram per kg IV bolus over 1 to 2 minutes, then 2 microgram per kg per minute IV for up to 72 hours. Doses in percutaneous coronary intervention, 180 microgram per kg IV bolus over 1 to 2 minutes, then another 180 microgram per kg IV bolus 10 minutes after first dose, then continuous infusion 2 microgram per kg per minute for at least 12 hours. Doses in renal impairment means chronic, the creatinine clearance less than 50 ml per minute. Here in acute coronary syndrome, 180 microgram per kg IV bolus over 1 to 2 minutes, then continuous infusion 1 microgram per kg per minute. And in PCI, when there is renal impairment, then you have to give 180 microgram per kg IV bolus over 1 to 2 minutes, then another 180 microgram per kg IV bolus 10 minutes after first dose, then continuous infusion 1 microgram per kg per minute. Now, in hemodialysis, safety and using during hemodialysis not established. Now the third antiplatelet, third glycoprotein second B third inhibitor antiplatelet tirofiban. The brand name Aggrastate. It is reversible. It is reversible glycoprotein second B third inhibitor. When given IV, more than 90% of platelet aggregation is inhibited. It has been approved to reduce the thrombotic cardiovascular events. For example, combined endpoint of death, new MI, refractory ischemia, and repeat cardiac procedure in patients undergoing PCI, including those undergoing intracoronary stenting. Now, non-ST elevation acute coronary syndrome loading dose is what? 25 microgram per kg IV infused within 5 minutes. Then post-loading dose infusion 0.15 microgram per kg per minute IV for up to 18 hours. Dose in renal impairment, if creatinine clearance is less than or equal to 60 ml per minute, decrease post-loading dose infusion by 50% to 0.075 microgram per kg per minute IV. Now, we have finished antiplatelet, the treatment for non-STEMI and unstable angina. Now in treatment we are going 4th point, antithrombotics. Among antithrombotics, you say antithrombotics inhibit formation and progression of thrombus. It also gives protection against deep vein thrombosis, pulmonary embolism and cardioembolic stroke. So first antithrombotic we are taking unfractionated heparin, and in acute coronary syndrome unfractionated heparin given as a bolus of 60 units per kg. Maximum bolus we can give 4,000 units. Remember, maximum bolus we can give 4,000 units, an infusion of 12 units per kg per hour. Maximum infusion can be used 1000 units per hour. Unfractured heparin titrate to maintain APTT 1.5 to 2.5 times of the control, that is 60 to 80 seconds. Unfractured heparin decrease cardiac events rate by 57% and fatal and non-fatal MI by 85%. There was a great reduction in rate of MI with unfractured heparin as compared with aspirin alone. Unfractured heparin subcutaneous can be given, but it is inferior to IV heparin. In setting of PCI, 70 to 100 units per kg or 50 to 70 units per kg used when combined with glycoprotein second B third A inhibitor. When glycoprotein second B third A blocker activated unfractured heparin used with glycoprotein second B third A blocker, then activating clotting time is used to monitor the anticoagulation action. Here ACT is used, anti-clotting, activated clotting time. Activated clotting time we are using to monitor the anticoagulation action. The activated clotting time normal range is 70 to 120 seconds. Maintain ACT in therapeutic range of 180 to 240 seconds. And to reach a target INR of 2 to 3. Aspirin is used in all patients as part of medical therapy. Efzimib is the only drug whose efficacy has been shown to be durable, lasting benefit up to 3 years. Never forget, efzimib is the only drug whose efficacy has been shown to be durable, lasting benefit up to 3 years. Whereas with other like integralin, tirofiban and lamivudine, it lasted beyond 6 months only. Overall, there was reduction in MI 40 to 50% in patient receiving glycoprotein second B third A blocker. Administration of glycoprotein second B third A blocker along with heparin and aspirin in unstable angina and non-STEMI associated with good clinical outcome in early follow-up means 30 days and 6 months. Bleeding complications are certainly higher. Most of these are mild with no intracranial hemorrhage, especially when used with unfractured heparin only 60 units per kg. Now what is the antidote of heparin? Because bleeding may occur sometimes. Then injection protamine is the antidote. So what is the dose? 1 to 1.5 milligram protamine per 100 units of heparin, not to exceed 50 mg of protamine in any case. Now time elapsed since heparin dose. What should be dose of protamine after time elapsed of the heparin dose? Dose of protamine is to neutralize 100 units of aspirin we are giving here. If half an hour has elapsed after heparin, then you give 1 to 1.5 mg per 100 unit of heparin. 1 to 1.5 mg protamine give for 100 unit of heparin. If time elapsed is 30 to 120 seconds, then give protamine 0.5 to 0.75 mg for 100 units of heparin. If time elapsed is more than 2 hours, then protamine should be given 0.25 to 0.375 mg for 100 units of heparin. Now, the second antithrombotic, that is low molecular weight heparin. This is low molecular weight heparin instead of unfractured heparin can be used. In place of unfractured heparin, we can use low molecular weight heparin. Advantages of low molecular weight heparin are following. Number one, it has got predictable action as we expect. What we expect action is predictable, it gives. Ease of subcutaneous administration due to higher bioavailability. Then third, superior bioavailability. Why? Due to lesser binding to platelet factor 4, which is a prothrombotic factor. Then it has got longer half-life, hence once or twice daily dosing required. Then number 5th, non-requirement for laboratory monitoring by APTT because it does not have much anti-factor 11, which is antithrombin activity, which has got antithrombin activity. Then 6th, better outcome in clinical trials for mortality and reinfarction. We have seen better outcome in clinical trials. Number 7, the last but not the least, small increase in bleeding risk due to low affinity for von Willebrand factor, which is a hemostatic. Now what are the doses for enoxaparin? If for unstable angina and non-QL MI, dose should be 1 mg per kg subcutaneous every 12 hours in conjunction with oral aspirin therapy. Aspirin should be given 100 to 325 mg once a day. Then the duration of therapy should be at least 2 days and until clinical stabilization. Usual duration is 2 to 8 days. Up to 12.5 days has been well tolerated in clinical trials. Use prophylaxis of ischemic complications of unstable angina and non-QA myocardial infarction when concurrently administered with aspirin. Forget not, it has to be given with aspirin. Then the dose in acute ST segment elevation MI, 30 mg IV bolus once, 30 mg IV bolus once, plus 1 mg per kg subcutaneous once, followed by 1 mg per kg subcutaneous every 12 hours, maximum 100 mg for first 2 doses only, followed by 1 mg per kg for the remaining doses. Duration of therapy should be what? Optimal duration is unknown, but it is likely to be longer than 8 days. Then what are the criteria for geriatric dosage of enoxaparin for MI 75 years or older people? Initial dose 0.75 mg per kg subcutaneous every 12 hours, maximum 75 mg for first two doses only, followed by 0.75 mg per kg for the remaining dosage. Do not use an initial IV bolus, in this case more than 75 years older. No dose adjustment unless kidney function impaired. Now the renal dose adjustment in adults. Mild to moderate renal dysfunction means creatinine clearance 30 to 80 ml per minute, then use with caution only. Take caution only. If severe renal dysfunction means creatinine clearance less than 30 ml per minute, then in acute coronary syndrome means in unstable angina and non-stable MI, always administered with aspirin and give 1 mg per kg subcutaneous once a day given. Used in STEMI less than 75 years old, administered with aspirin only. 30 mg IV bolus once plus 1 mg per kg subcutaneous once, followed by 1 mg per kg subcutaneous once a day. In STEMI patients more than 75 years old, administered with aspirin only, 1 mg per kg subcutaneous once a day, no initial bolus. Dose in the setting of PCI for non-stable elevation MI or unstable angina, no additional anticoagulant is needed if last dose of enoxaparin was given within 8 hours of PCI. If enoxaparin given more than 80 hours before PCI, additional IV bolus of 0.3 mg per kg enoxaparin should be given, because antithrombotic effect cannot be monitored easily. Physician may prefer to use unfractionated heparin boluses titrated to activated clotting time in this scenario. Now precautions. What precautions you have to take? In case of bleeding, reverse by protamine. In case of advanced renal dysfunction, means creatinine clearance less than 30 mg per minute, dosing schedule is once daily. And you must know, low molecular weight heparin, preferably is the enoxaparin only, should be the standard anticoagulant for acute phase of non-STEMI and unstable angina. Enoxaparin antidote. Here antidote will be again protamine, 1 mg protamine per milligram enoxaparin. If enoxaparin overdose is given within 8 hours, remember, if given within 8 hours. If more than 8 hours of overdose or bleeding continues after 4 hours after first dose, give 0.5 mg protamine per milligram enoxaparin. Now the third, the antithrombotic, the fondaparinux. It is selective factor 10th inhibitor and exert their action indirectly through antithrombin third, which is a anticoagulant. Selective factor 10th inhibitor exert their action indirectly through antithrombin third, which is anticoagulant, like heparin. Fondaparinux is a anticoagulant, may be given 2.5 mg IV for the first dose and then subcutaneous OD for 9 days. Patient undergoing PCI not recommended. Forget not, patient undergoing PCI not recommended. Then the fourth antithrombotic, bivalirudin, the brand name Angiomax. This anticoagulant has direct thrombin inhibitor property and has significant reduction of bleeding events when compared to unsaturated heparin plus glycoprotein second B third inhibitor. Bivalirudin, the Angiomax, an anticoagulant, cannot be recommended as the first line strategy for anticoagulation. It is indicated for use as an anticoagulant in patients with unstable angina undergoing PTCA and percutaneous intervention. Again I repeat, it is indicated for use as an anticoagulant in patients with unstable angina undergoing PTCA and PCI. PTCA, percutaneous transluminal coronary angioplasty, and percutaneous coronary intervention. It is indicated for patients with or at risk of heparin-induced thrombocytopenia (HIT) or heparin-induced thrombocytopenia and thrombosis syndrome (HITTS) undergoing PCI. I again repeat, it is indicated for patients with or at risk of heparin-induced thrombocytopenia (HIT) or heparin-induced thrombocytopenia and thrombosis syndrome (HITTS) undergoing PCI, given to patient receiving concomitant aspirin 300 to 325 mg daily. In patient with heparin-induced thrombocytopenia (HTI), it remains a successful strategy. The safety and effectiveness have not been established in patients with acute coronary syndrome who are not undergoing PTCA or PCI. Administration continued following PCI or PTCA up to 4 hours post-procedure or at the discretion of treating physician. Up to 4 hours post-procedure or at the discretion of treating physician. Recommended dosage given to patient receiving concomitant aspirin 300 to 325 mg daily. For patients who have not heparin-induced thrombocytopenia or heparin-induced thrombocytopenia and thrombosis syndrome (HIT or HITTS) undergoing PCI, IV bolus of 0.75 mg per kg followed by continuous infusion at a rate of 1.75 milligram per kg per hour for the duration of procedure. Infusion may be continued in STEMI at a rate of 1.75 mg per kg per hour following PCI or PTCA for up to 4 hours post procedure, and it should be considered to mitigate, make less severe risk of stent thrombosis. After 4 hours, an additional IV infusion of bivalirudin may be initiated at a rate of 0.2 mg per kg per hour. It is low rate infusion for up to 20 hours if needed. Recommended dose for patients who do not have HIT or HITTS, IV bolus dose of 0.75 mg per kg following immediately by an infusion of 1.75 mg per kg per hour for the duration of PCI or PTCA procedure. 5 minutes after bolus dose, an activated clotting time performed and an additional bolus of 0.3 mg per kg should be given if necessary, not in routine. Dosing in renal impairment, no reduction in bolus dosage is needed for any degree of renal impairment. No reduction in bolus dosage for any degree of renal impairment. With moderate renal impairment, 30 to 59 ml per minute, an infusion of 1.75 mg per kg per hour given. If creatinine clearance is less than 30 ml per minute, reduction of infusion rate to 1 mg per kg per hour should be considered. If the patient is on hemodialysis, the infusion rate should be reduced to 0.25 mg per kg per hour. Now, all IV preparation, anticoagulants, we have finished. Now we are going to discuss novel oral anticoagulants. Novel oral anticoagulants. Oral factor 10A inhibitor, rivaroxaban, apixaban, and dabigatran, tried in setting of acute coronary syndrome. Low dose rivaroxaban, 2.5 and 5 mg twice daily, added to standard dual antiplatelet therapy in acute coronary syndrome. Endpoint of MI, stroke and death was reduced, and higher bleeding events observed, including intracranial hemorrhage. Rivaroxaban, apixaban and dabigatran were terminated. Remember, again see, were terminated due to increased bleeding risk, and their use are not indicated. Now we are coming to renin, angiotensin, aldosterone blockers. ACE inhibitor reduce mortality in patients with acute MI, especially in setting of LV dysfunction when left ventricular ejection fraction is less than 40%. Normally it is 60%. ACE inhibitor also reduces mortality in patients with comorbidities like diabetes mellitus, hypertension and coronary artery disease. Patient not tolerated ACE inhibitor, angiotensin receptor blocker, preferably valsartan, can be substituted. Mineralocorticoid receptor antagonist. Mineralocorticoid receptor antagonist like spironolactone and eplerenone initiate in patient with LV dysfunction or patient with heart failure. Concomitant use of ACE inhibitor ARB warrants what? Careful watch for hyperkalemia. Now we are taking for treatment of acute coronary syndrome, that unstable angina and non-stable MI. Statins are very important. High dose or intensive statin therapy. Don't forget this formula. High dose or intensive statin therapy in unstable angina or non-ST elevation MI, defined by American College of Cardiology and American Heart Association in 2013 guidelines. Atorvastatin 80 mg or rosuvastatin 40 mg should be initiated at the time of admission and continued after discharge. High dose statins reduces rates of recurrent MI, ischemia, repeated revascularization, stroke and death. In PCI, preload of statin reduces periprocedural MI. Now, for treatment of acute coronary syndrome like unstable angina and non-ST elevation MI, we are going for on coronary revascularization. It is much superior in controlling chest pain as compared to medical treatment, as compared to optimum medical treatment, OMT. The following approaches for invasive management are possible. Number one, routine early cardiac catheterization. Further therapy based on coronary anatomy. Then second, ischemia guided approach means initial medical management by optimum medical therapy. Cardiac catheterization reserved for recurrent symptoms or clinical deterioration. So first is cardiac catheterization, second is by OMT. So there are so many studies for invasive management in non-ST elevation MI and unstable angina in India. Data from selected studies like CREATE, Kerala, Sharma, Iqbal, Gupta and HP. I will show you only two studies. Number one, CREATE. Here, the patient who reported as a unstable angina, 25.7% underwent the angiography, and out of that 6.7% went to PCI, and out of these 4.4% went for CABG. And in Kerala acute coronary syndrome study, non-ST MI were 18.6%, unstable angina patients were 20.2%, and angiography were done for these patients, and PCI was done for non-STEMI 11.7% people, and in unstable angina 10.9% people, and CABG was done 1.2% in NSTEMI and 1.7% in unstable angina. Now we have to choose the type of invasive management. If we go for invasive management, choose the type of invasive management. The routine invasive method is more rational, logical for reduction in non-fatal MI, re-hospitalization, for recurrent acute coronary syndrome and mortality. 11% risk reduction was seen in high risk group, and 2 to 4% risk reduction was seen in low to intermediate risk group. Then other factors for deciding definite management is what? Advanced age, more than 70, frailty, weak and delicate person, comorbid conditions like diabetes, chronic kidney disease, etc. Life expectancy, average number of years a person is expected to live based on statistical data, we have to see. Then adherence to dual antiplatelet therapy, we have to see. Then bleeding risk should be taken in account. Then cognitive status, mental status should be taken in account. Then socio-economic status should be taken in account, whether he can afford PCI, no, or whether he has got good insurance or no. Now for this you have to see this figure. The routine invasive therapy, patients with high risk anatomy, who are 20% patient only, benefit from CABG. And early PCI prevents recurrent symptoms and complications, always remember. And patients with normal coronaries, 10 to 20% are found and they are discharged early. Then ischemia guided strategy treated by optimum medical therapy only, because optimum medical therapy stabilize on medical therapy. Why people are not going for routine invasive? Because economic burden of costly PCI in our country. In India, normally 100% cannot afford PCI because they don't have money, or if they have, there is decreased quantity of health insurance with them. Then we have to go for timing of routine invasive management. What should be the timing of routine invasive management? Whether it should be immediate or early or delayed. There are three things: immediate, early and delayed. We will discuss all the three separately. The first medical presentation can be non-intervention hospital. Definitely patient will report to any dispensary or clinic which can be non-intervention hospital. Here appropriate triage, order of treatment given, and patients should be transferred to nearest PCI center warranted, because he has to go for PCI or CABG. So we have to see the timing, appropriate timing of invasive therapy with non-ischemic acute coronary syndrome, according to American College of Cardiology Foundation and American Heart Association, updated in 2014. Timing of PCI should be: number 1, immediate, means within 2 hours, or it should be early, within 24 hours, or delayed within 25 to 72 hours. So first we will see what are the conditions where we have to do immediate within 2 hours. Number 1, refractory angina. Refractory angina. Here refractory angina defined as the occurrence of frequent anginal attacks uncontrolled by OMT and significantly limiting the patient's daily activities. Then second, recurrent episodes of angina despite medical therapy. Recurrent episodes of angina despite medical therapy. Third, acute heart failure. Fourth, sustained VT and VF or cardiac arrest. Fifth, hemodynamic instability or cardiogenic shock. Sixth, mechanical complication with mitral regurgitation. Then early invasive management within 24 hours should be done when new dynamic ST changes with or without pain found, or Grace score is more than 140, or there is sufficient rise or fall in cardiac biomarkers. Should be sufficient rise, not minimum. Then when delayed invasive treatment can be given, means within 25 to 72 hours. Number 1, diabetes mellitus. Number 2, renal dysfunction, means estimated glomerular filtration rate less than 60 ml per minute per 1.73 meter per square body surface area. Or number 3, left ventricular ejection fraction less than 40%, or Grace score 109 to 140, or TIMI score more than 2 or higher, or prior PCI or CABG, or presence of post-MI angina, or high risk features on non-invasive testing. Now, while doing invasive therapy, you have to remember certain things which are not written in this table. Number one, a heart team approach required. What is a heart team approach? Involving interventional cardiologist and cardiac surgeon required in patient with whom? Number one, diabetes mellitus. Number two, multi-vessel coronary artery disease. What do you mean by multi-vessel? Triple vessel disease of 70% stenosis or greater, and double vessel disease of 70% stenosis or greater, involving the proximal LAD, plus at least one non-culprit lesion and a fractional flow reserve equal to or less than 0.80 in a vessel of diameter equal to or more than 2.5 millimeter. This is multi-vessel artery. Here you cannot, you require this the heart team approach. Then you require heart team approach in severe left main disease, means 50% stenosis or greater. Now again you require high team approach in high syntax score equal to or more than 33. Then number B, apart from heart team approach, presence of cardiogenic shock and heart failure warrants complete revascularization in initial setting. For others, a form of staged complete revascularization seems appropriate. And third point here, which is not in this figure, staged complete revascularization. Complete revascularization defines staged PCI of all significant non-complete lesion either before hospital discharge or during second hospitalization within 40 days of the index PCI. Index PCI means that is the presence of right ventricular infarction in patient with acute inferior MI. Now we are running in invasive therapy. So what is the role of coronary angiography? It is the gold standard, forget not, the gold standard for diagnosing epicardial coronary stenosis and confirming diagnosis of acute coronary syndrome. Coronary artery identifies culprit and non-culprit lesion. It identifies defining coronary anatomy for choosing intervention PCI or CAPG and identifying extent of CAD for long-term prognosis. Now we have to see before invasive therapy the distribution of coronary artery disease. The distribution of coronary artery disease. Number one, up to 20% patients have no significant obstruction of major coronary arteries. Second, multi-vessel disease can be seen in 40 to 80% of cases. Number third, left main and bypass graft disease seen in 5 to 10% cases. Fourth, left anterior descending is the most frequent culprit. Fifth, majority 45 to 55% had only single vessel disease. Number six, 15 to 25% had normal or insignificant disease. Now, I have spoken identifying culprit lesion. Before identifying culprit lesion, we are supposed to know what is non-culprit lesion. Non-culprit lesion which are anatomically discrete means less than 10 millimeter length, significant lesion and in proximal epicardial artery. Now what is culprit lesion? Culprit lesion is a angiographic finding of culprit lesion include ruptured plaque with irregular or scalloped margins, ulcerated plaque, intraluminal defect suggestive of thrombus, eccentric tight stenosis, dissection and near total occlusion with impaired distal flow. Now, intracoronary imaging, for example, optical coherence tomography (OCT) can identify thin cap atheroma, plaque erosion, lipid-rich plaque, thrombus, and dissection. In case of previous PCI, intravascular ultrasonography or optical coherence tomography can identify malapposition of valve reflex, under expansion, strut fracture. Strut fracture means a life-threatening adverse effect of mechanical prosthetic heart valve, and age dissection, geographic missing thrombus, and initial hyperplasia or neoatherosclerosis. You can find out by intravenous ultrasonography or optical coherence tomography for invasive therapy. Then, percutaneous coronary intervention, when we are going for this, you have to remember the vascular access. What should be the vascular access? The radial route lessen the access site bleeding. If the operator is skilled in radial intervention, it can be preferred. Femoral route is time tested and indispensable for intra-aortic balloon pump and transvenous pacing during PCI. Puncture under radiographic guidance and proper puncture site compression. Proper puncture site compression can help to reduce complication. So here what we conclude, the radial route is supremo. Then choice of stent. Which stent should be, first you have seen the access should be radial artery. Then which stent we should use? Drug-eluting stent have significantly altered the outcome of PCI dramatically. The second generation drug-eluting stent like everolimus eluting stent and third generation drug-eluting stent with thin struts and biodegradable stents have eliminated stent thrombosis as well as in stent thrombosis. They have shown better outcomes than bare metal stenosis with a shorter duration of dual antiplatelet therapy. Now you have to do thrombus aspiration. You have seen which stent should be used. Now thrombus aspiration should be done. It should be done in large visible thrombus burden and in no reflow phenomenon. No reflow phenomenon is a question of DM cardiology, means microvascular dysfunction. No reflow phenomenon is defined as inadequate myocardial perfusion through a given segment of coronary circulation without angiographic evidence of mechanical vessel obstruction. Myocardial contrast echocardiography is the gold standard. Myocardial contrast echocardiography is the gold standard for diagnosis of no reflow phenomenon. No reflow phenomenon occurs in 0.6% to 3.2% of post-PCI cases. Vasodilators improve microvascular function after acute MI. Then you have to check fractional flow reserve, FFR. FFR you have to check. FFR is a technique used in coronary catheterization to measure pressure difference across a coronary artery stenosis to determine the likelihood that the stenosis impedes, prevents oxygen delivery to the heart muscle. FFR has enabled interventional cardiologists to accurately determine whether coronary atherosclerotic plaques are responsible for MI and therefore it deserves to be revascularized. FFR is still remains the gold standard for the detection of ischemia-inducing coronary stenosis. FFR guided PCI has been demonstrated superior to an angiography-induced PCI and over medical therapy alone. Also, it could perform better or at least equalize the result. Again I read, it could perform better or at least equalize the results of cardiac surgery in patients with severe multivessel disease. Now, one point more before the revascularization, we are supposed to know culprit versus complete revascularization. Very important point. A question of DM cardiology. A question of DM cardiology. Culprit versus complete revascularization. Presence of cardiogenic shock and heart failure warrants complete revascularization in initial setting. For others, a form of staged complete revascularization seems appropriate. Multiple studies have shown poor outcomes with incomplete revascularization. A residual syntax score more than 8 portends one's short-term and long-term poor prognosis. Complete revascularization defines staged PCI of all significant non-culprit lesion either before hospital discharge or during second hospitalization within 48 days of index PCI. Index PCI means that is the presence of right ventricular infarction in patient with acute inferior MI. Now, if we go for CABG, what are the special indications of the CABG? For CABG, the 3 points should be remembered mainly. Otherwise, there are so many indications, but mainly 3 indications. Number 1, left main disease if it is distal. Triple vessel disease with LV dysfunction. Multivessel disease with diabetes mellitus. Now, the time of weaning, declining, the effect of antiplatelets to reduce periprocedural bleeding due to antiplatelet agents. What is the timing for weaning? The effect of antiplatelet to reduce periprocedural bleeding due to antiplatelet agents. For hemodynamically stable patient without recurrent ischemia, 5 days cessation of ticagrelor or clopidogrel and 7 days cessation of prasugrel withdrawal is optimum. Again listen, 5 days cessation of ticagrelor or clopidogrel and 7 days cessation of prasugrel withdrawal is optimum. Aspirin is continued till surgery and restarted after 6 hours. In patient at high risk of ischemic events, bridging therapy with glycoprotein second B third A or cangrelor can be tried. In patient with ongoing ischemia, hemodynamics instability and high risk anatomy, early CABG irrespective of DAPT, double antiplatelet therapy is indicated. So, before discharge of the patient from hospital, we have to take or do the risk stratification by non-invasive testing. So, pre-discharge risk stratification by non-invasive stress testing in patient initially stabilized medically or non-diagnostic ECG enzymes in emergency department. There are 3 categories: high risk, intermediate risk and low risk group of the patients. In high risk, more than 3% annual mortality rate found, and in intermediate risk 1 to 3% annual mortality rate found, and in low risk patient less than 1% annual mortality rate found. Now in high risk The following variables or symbols are seen. These are the 7 variables. The first variable, you will find severe resting LV dysfunction, means left ventricular ejection fraction will be less than 35%. Second, high risk treatment score will be seen, means score will be less than -11. Now don't confuse, it is in minus. When the treatment score is high, it comes in minus, so it is less than -11. You can find out exercise treatment score by this formula, and it will come in minus. So high risk treatment score, if it is less than -11, indicates 5 years survival of 65%. Among them 74% had TVD or left main coronary artery occlusion. Then third point, severe exercise LV dysfunction, when ejection fraction will be less than 35%. Fourth, stress induced large perfusion defect, particularly if anterior seen, then it will be high risk. Fifth, stress induced multiple perfusion defects of moderate size. Sixth, large fixed perfusion defect with LV dilation on increased lung uptake with thallium 201 noted. Seventh, echocardiographic valve motion abnormality involving more than 2 segments developing at low dose of dobutamine, means what should be dose? 10 microgram per kg per minute or less, or at a low heart rate less than 120 beats per minute. Now the intermediate risk, 1 to 3% annual mortality rate. Now here following variables are seen. First, mild to moderate resting LV dysfunction, means left ventricular ejection fraction is 0.35% or 0.49%. Intermediate risk treatment scale -11 to +5. Treatment score risk -11 to +5 indicates 5-year survival of 90%. There 5-year survival was of 65%. Here 5-year survival of 90%. Stress induced moderate perfusion defect without LV dilation or increased lung uptake of the thallium notate. Then limited stress echocardiac ischemia, valve motion abnormality only at high dose of dobutamine involving less than or equal to 2 segments. Then lastly, the low risk less than 1% annual mortality rate. Following variables are seen. First, normal or small myocardial perfusion defect at rest or with stress. Second, normal stress echocardiography valve motion or no change or limited resting valve motion abnormalities during stress. Third and last, low risk treatment score, the score more than 5 or negative treatment test, indicates a 5-year survival of 97%. Their 5-year survival was 65%, and intermediate 5-year survival was 90%, and in low risk 5-year survival is of 97%. Then risk stratification by non-invasive methods. It was done for patients managed medically and who are stable without symptoms. Non-invasive stress testing recommended as soon as they are pain-free for 12 to 24 hours. Patients with suspected acute coronary syndrome with normal ECG and enzymes who could not undergo coronary computed tomography, CT angiography, should also go for stress test, for example TMT exercise test, stress echo and stress myocardial imaging. Third, imaging modalities are preferred in presence of baseline ECG changes, for example right and left ventricular hypertrophy, bundle branch block, hemi-blocks and pace rhythm. Pharmacological stress is preferred in imaging modalities. Fourth, high risk patients should undergo invasive management. Fifth, low risk features warrants medical therapy unless symptoms are recurrent. Sixth, for patients with intermediate features, additional features like risk score, clinical ECAD, drug adherence, and risk of intervention are to be taken into account. Preparing for secondary prevention. Now we have to prepare the patient for secondary prevention. Following four arms of secondary prevention are to be taken into account. Number one, optimum medical therapy. Second, control of risk factors. Third, lifestyle modification. And fourth and last, key for dietary recommendations. First, secondary prevention, we are taking OMT medication at discharge given. Optimum medical therapy given at discharge. Following medications with long-term prognostic value are given. For example, number one, aspirin, 75 to 150 continued indefinitely. P2Y12 inhibitor given continuously up to 1 year. A double antiplatelet therapy score more than 2 has a favorable risk benefit for extended use of dual antiplatelet therapy. C. High intensity statin therapy. Forget not, high intensity statin therapy should be initiated in all patients before discharge, irrespective of lipid level. Then ACE inhibitor or ARB recommended in all patients with LV dysfunction, hypertension, diabetes mellitus, heart failure. Then beta blocker and mineralocorticoid receptor antagonist indicated in all patients with LV dysfunction and heart failure. Then anti-angiogenic drugs, beta blocker, nitrate, calcium channel blocker, ranolazine indicated in patients who did not undergo revascularization, underwent incomplete or unsuccessful revascularization, continue to have symptoms, and all patients before discharge should be informed regarding symptoms of MI and how to seek medical care. Then lastly, sublingual tablets of nitrates and nitrate nasal spray should be kept handy and their use communicated. Now, in secondary prevention, OMT you have seen. Now you should take care of 9 risk factor control of secondary prevention. Number 1, increased ratio of apolipoprotein B100 and apolipoprotein A1. Current or former smoking. Hypertension should be corrected. Diabetes should be corrected. Increase high waist hip ratio should be corrected. Psychosocial factors, stress or depression should be corrected. Decrease moderate or high intensity exercise should be corrected. Alcohol consumption more than once a week should be corrected. Decrease consumption of fruits and vegetables should be corrected. Then, third, secondary prevention, lifestyle modification program. The following lifestyle modifications are recommended for all patients of acute coronary syndrome. First, complete cessation of all forms of tobacco, whether smoke or non-smoke, smokeless means chewing the tobacco. Then reduce body weight in overweight and obese patients. This helps in controlling BP, dyslipidemia and diabetes mellitus. Attain a BMI of less than 22.9 kg per meter square and a waist circumference of less than 90 cm in male and 80 cm in female respectively. A diet low in saturated fats and high in fruits, vegetables and whole grains is recommended. Avoid trans fatty acid, means partially hydrogenated oils, because they increase the risk of atherosclerosis. Use polyunsaturated fatty acids and Mediterranean diet like fish. Physical activity, 30 to 60 minutes of moderate intensity aerobic exercise 5 days in a week should be done. For patients with congestive cardiac failure, limiting angina and recent MI, structured means object-oriented programming (OOP), a cardiac rehabilitation program is advisable. For management of stress and depression should be done. Moderate alcohol intake should be taken. Non-pregnant women 1 drink per day and men 1 to 2 drink per day unless contraindicated, like in alcohol abuse in the society and liver diseases like cirrhosis and malignancy of the liver. Lastly, avoidance of air pollution and yearly influenza vaccination advised. The last prevention, secondary prevention. The fourth prevention, for dietary recommendations. We are taking separately the complete diet in 16 points. Eat plenty of soluble fiber with non-refined cereals. They increase fullness and decrease calorie absorption. Avoid processed foods that contain trans fats like hydrogenated oils and meat should be avoided. And excess of saturated fats, they are linked to insulin resistance. What is insulin resistance? Obesity, hypertriglycemia, low HDL, hyperglycemia, tension. And third point, don't drink too much alcohol. The fourth point, eat a high protein diet. It increases release of fullness hormone known as PYY, which decrease appetite and promote fullness. Don't eat a lot of sugary foods like simple carb means sugar. It should be replaced by natural complex sugar like whole grain food containing fibers, vitamins and minerals which take longer time to digest. Sixth, cut back on carbohydrate, especially refined carbohydrates like maida. Replace some of your cooking fats with coconut oil. Coconut oil have medium chain fats in coconut oil may boost metabolism and decrease the amount of fat. And also a balanced oil like mustard oil recommended. A balanced oil like mustard oil recommended. Avoid sugar sweetened beverages. Track your food intake and exercise. Keep track of what you are eating by keeping a food diary. Eat fatty fish every week because omega-3 fatty acid decrease visceral fats. Stop drinking fruit juices and increase intake of plenty of vegetables and fruits which contain fibers. Add apple cider vinegar to your diet which contain acetic acid which reduces fat storage. Eat probiotic food or take a probiotic supplement. Probiotics are bacteria which may have promote weight loss. Try intermittent fasting and calorie intake limitation to optimize body weight by autophagy. Most effective way to lose weight. What is autophagy? Which defines cleaning out damaged cells in order to regenerate newer, healthier cells, and you can conquer the cancer also by this autophagy. Drink green tea. It contains caffeine and antioxidant epigallocatechin 3 gallate EGCG, both boost metabolism and reduce weight. Avoid excess sodium salt. Remember, avoid excess sodium salt and increase enhancement of potassium enriched food which is considered to counter the effect of sodium salt and lower the BP. Important for patients who have underwent PCI or CABG should be counseled that revascularization is not all treatment and still they need lifestyle modifications. Now, when we discharge a patient, you are supposed to know the duration of hospital stay. Patients who underwent PCI are usually discharged on next day. Patients who underwent CABG are usually discharged within 4 to 7 days. Patients who underwent medical treatment are usually discharged after stress testing, which depends on result, with low or intermediate risk groups discharged same way, with high risk group patients invasive therapy advised. If invasive is not suitable or if patient refuses it, then 3 days in patient monitoring done and optimization of medical therapy is warranted. Physical activity and return to work after discharge should be addressed to the patient. Daily walking is encouraged soon after discharge. Aerobic exercise can be started by 2 weeks. Mild resistance training to move your limbs against the resistance is started by 4 weeks. For unsupervised exercise, the target should be 60 to 75% of your maximum predicted heart rate. With trainer supervising exercise, the target should be 70 to 80% of your maximum heart predicted rate. Now, we have done so much, but in India, unmet requirement not achieved. In India, unmet requirement not achieved needs fulfillment in Indian context. Why? Because low awareness of recognition of acute coronary syndrome among primary caregivers are major causes for delayed presentation to hospital for non-ST elevation MI and unstable angina. Second, the problem is worse in rural, remote and inaccessible parts of our country. Number third, even after presentation to hospital, it is found that optimum hospital medical care and optimum hospital discharge care which is defined by use of dual antiplatelet therapy, aspirin, clopidogrel, beta blockers, statins and heparins, all could be delivered to only 40 to 46% patients in India. Despite having the high literacy in our country, only 12 to 15% of patients underwent revascularization in Kerala. This is the example of Kerala. Only 12 to 15% patients underwent revascularization despite having the high literacy rate. Academic hospitals and urban hospitals delivered optimum medical care, resulting in 21% decrease in hospital major adverse cardiovascular events. Drugs for secondary prevention are not used in 80% patients in India. Data from Rajasthan also show low rates of use of evidence-based medical therapy. Any 3 drugs are given in 50% only, and all 4 drugs are given in only 35% patients. Now I will like to discuss and remind you the following measures required to fulfill the unmet needs in India. Number 1, acute coronary syndrome occurs a decade earlier than Western counterparts. We are 10 to 15 years earlier. We get heart attack 10 to 15 years earlier than the Western part. Incidence of non-STEMI is rising versus unstable angina. Atypical and rare presentations are more frequent in India. And cause I have told you already of the late presentation. Use of high sensitive troponin needs to be encouraged more in India so that they can reach timely. Then be cautious for secondary precipitating factors like anemia and infections in our India, which is very, very common. Then TIMI or Grace score, transfusion in myocardial infarction or Grace score can be used for risk stratification. This score should be used. Medical therapy remains cornerstone of the management. Medical therapy remains cornerstone of management. Clopidogrel remains the widely used P2Y12 inhibitor because of low cost, wide experience and demonstrated safely. In PCI capable centers, search for high risk features and mandate order early interventions. High risk features and mandate order early intervention. In non-PCI capable centers, after initial medically stabilized patient, detection of high and intermediate risk features warrants early transfer to a PCI capable center. Before discharge, medically managed subjects should undergo non-invasive testing for risk stratification. Never forget this 11th point. Then the 12th point, last but not the least, initiation of drugs for secondary prevention and life interventions are key measures of decreasing future events. Then the conclusion. We conclude percutaneous intervention has become the mainstay of definite management owing to technical advancement in both technique and devices for better prognosis. Real world data portend wants a grim, very serious picture, and much needs to be done in our country as we have seen and discussed in last TEBA. Thank you very much for your kind attention, and now I will request all of you to listen very delicately the next part, the ST elevation myocardial infarction in 3 parts. So I will be taking soon the first part of ST elevation myocardial infarction. Thank you very much for your kind attention.